and actually very few specified English, but when you go into the papers, of the 131 that were unspecified, you see that quite many of them are using English datasets. And then there are also 53 that say multilingual, and when you go into those are about machine translation, and machine translation is inherently multilingual. But what is the multilinguality? The multilinguality is not, Zulu or Quechua. The multilinguality is English and a Category A language or a Category B language, usually. And then there was a special track for under-resourced languages that 10 papers talked about. So that was, and looking at those were essentially Category B languages. Or, a few smaller languages, but, 10 papers out of 230 is a small amount. It's good that that attention is being paid, but, it's less than half of 1%, right? Now, even French wasn't represented in the list of named languages, and that's actually, again, something that's of concern. I was at EPFL for several years in Switzerland. It's in the French part of Switzerland, and students would come to me to work on projects, language-related projects, and they were doing NLP things, but were working in English even though they're native French speakers in a French-speaking country, because English is the data set that they had available, or you can get comparable results, you can build on things, and you can compare to other people dealing with English. Whereas because the French resources weren't as well developed, they decided they didn't want to actually start on, have the ability to do what they wanted in computationally with the French stuff. So, so even it seems that people who have other language backgrounds other than English are often working on that side or on the other lucrative languages. So the conference location was in Asia, and there were 15 papers that were identifiably from Asian regarding Asian languages. And then so I wanted to investigate, are there more of those papers that are actually dealing with Asian languages? And so when I went into them, some of them were, but some of them were also dealing with the English datasets. Asian researchers at Asian institutions, but working for this larger, NLP is the international market, which is focused on the biggest languages. Now, the biggest languages do include Chinese and Japanese, but I went back to the catalog from the AsiaLex, the Asian Lexicography Association proceedings from 2015. You can see that over on the right. So it's just a small comparison here. So this is a direct shot from the proceedings of the AsiaLex conference. It was striking at AsiaLex how predominant either people are working on who are working on lexicography, and that's often digital, but not necessarily. And people who are working on lexicography are working either on their particular language, usually, which is great, or their particular language vis-a-vis English. So here you see Japanese English, China English, Hong Kong English, Indonesian English, and the catalog, the proceedings go on largely in that vein. So, so there is good work being done on some of the larger Asian languages, but a lot of questions that are not being asked. And again, Category C languages are almost entirely not represented. So, for example, again, at the AsiaLex conference, there were a lot of papers about Chinese, one paper about the minority languages of China. There's there's work being done in Vietnamese, but not in the dozens of other languages that are spoken in Vietnam that are not the national Vietnamese language. Okay, so then I thought, okay, so this is what's happening within the computer sciences in relation to languages. The Category C languages are not having any attention paid. What can we say about people who are actually working on the Category C languages? Let's go at it from the other direction. And so I looked at the catalog from the International Conference on Language Documentation and Conservation I was in Hawaii last year, similar to the one that had in 2 years before, but 1 year seemed like it would be representative enough. There were 166 papers and posters. and there were 75 languages that were listed in the catalog. All of these, sort of inherently are Category C languages. That's what the conference is all about. Particularly languages spoken around the Pacific Rim, from Australia, the Polynesia, various places in Asia, and then Native American languages, first languages in Canada, Native American languages in the U.S., and then down into South America. It's a great conference if you ever have a chance to go. This is probably my favorite conference. It's people doing really interesting work on revitalization and preservation, and really passionate. But are they doing computational work is the question at hand. Of the 166 papers, only 24 of them were related to improving technological resources. So most of them were about using existing technology, thinking, okay, there's a software package out there, and how do we use it for our language? They weren't about generating new computational resources. So they had titles like leveraging web technologies to enrich archival materials for use in language revitalization, or large-scale language documentation in Nepal, strategy based on Seymour and Bold software packages, or engaging indigenous language learners with an epic story through a language learning app. It was a great paper, and I attended that. It was very interesting, but it was not computational linguistics. It was not NLP. Now, where there was NLP talked about it, was a side conference, and it was the second version of the Computel, the Computation for Endangered Languages. And so this was after the main conference. There was a workshop, and there were 23 presentations. And again, many of them, like the main conference, were about using existing tech. They weren't about pushing forward. But there were a few that were about heavy-duty NLP, and this is actually an encouraging sign. So they were about, one was called Improving Coverage of an Inkstitute Morphological Analyzer Using a Segmental Recurrent Neural Network. Another was Converting a Comprehensive Lexical Database into a Computational Model, the case of East Cree verb inflection. Now, these are things that could really be at a computational linguistics conference. Really solid work mixing linguistics and the latest that you need to know about in computation. So there are encouraging signs, but there are two papers that you had to hunt for in this small room in Hawaii. They're not at the Koling conference in Japan. So in sum, mostly the people who are interested in working on pushing forward on things regarding the Category C languages are not the people who are interested in working on pushing forward on the technology aspects. Okay, so now let me briefly talk about what I've been doing with the research regarding Google Translate. I'm doing a quality study where we had measures from English to language X with native speakers from all 102 other languages in their system. And also found that there are a few direct pairs. We didn't research the quality of those. So Catalan Spanish is very definitely going directly, but everything else is pretty much through all the through the research going by English. German French goes German to English to French, for example. So we found through this that giving everybody the same set of English phrases to evaluate whether they were great or understandable or completely missed the mark. Found that in 67% about 2/3 of the languages, 67 languages, they failed at complete failure at 50% of the time or more, and 33 languages, so a third of the languages, failed more than 2/3 of the time. So those are languages that are on the list, on the Google list, but are they receiving any service at all? If you fail 67% of the time or more, you're on the list. And 3 of the languages, Tajik, Bengali, and Haitian Creole, failed 100% of the time. That does not indicate that they're actually being provided a service in this context. They have to say that there are certain other languages that are doing quite well, and we have getting what I call Bard ratings. Are you giving English like Shakespeare might give English? Some of the languages we're actually giving were giving translations that were coming out quite nicely. Afrikaans was a surprise, and that's because of how closely it's related to English in a variety of ways. And then the ones you might expect, German, Portuguese. Indonesian was a surprise. I want to do some more testing on that. But the point is that there are some languages that came out clearly doing well and some languages that are on the list. Now, the positive aspect of having them on the list is that it establishes that any language actually can enter the digital realm. You know, if Google can have something that is said to be working for Samoan, well, Samoan becomes a language that you can consider as eligible for language technology. Maori, Corsican, can see, and then so that also gives you the hope that if these languages are there, then maybe other languages that they don't already have could also be candidates for taking seriously in the digital realm. But the danger here is that it gives the illusion that Google has solved technology for all those languages, and as the numbers indicate, it's really kind of put some words on the internet for those languages. And a lot of people really think that Google has solved languages in technology. You know, why do you want to work on all these languages? Hasn't Google already done that? How many times have I heard this? How hasn't Google already done that? And the danger here is that there's this huge barrier to entry, because people think if Google has done it or is about to do it for all the other languages, that there's no point in trying to have outside researchers work on it. So I'll sum up now. First, I want to say that the research has made me rethink the Category B aspect. There's more funding proportionally going into these Category B languages than I had appreciated at first. So I made the square bigger in relation to A. And also there might be some languages that used to be B that are now sort of moving into what you would consider A, and Chinese is one of those. But this being a workshop about the under-resourced languages, we'll leave aside those discussions. You know, do some of the less researched European languages count as B or C? Well, that's a debate for another day. So Category B is making strides, but within Category C, within those 6,900 somewhat languages, we found very few jobs, very little research. If there are no people working on them now and there's no research happening now, there's very little mentorship, nothing to send graduate students out to do the work, to do projects on languages that don't have a market potential. There's very little funding, so there's, you know, for those 6,900 some odd languages are chopping up a very small pie. And, you know, if nothing is happening now, what is the chance of improvement going forward? If we look out, you know, in the next 10 years, if very few people are able to push forward on research for languages like Aymara or Xhosa or languages with tens of millions of people even, but no pull for getting this sort of research funding, and then we're not really, you know, the numbers that we're looking at are not really very encouraging. So I hope that I don't want to throw cold water on what I hope is a wonderful event that you're having in Japan, but there is, you know, the hard numbers do come out that it's a lot of cold water and things that we have to think about. You know, how is it possible for us to push for people to work in other languages? You know, somehow make it into a cool, pressing, urgent issue that people want to be involved with, who are working in computational linguistics, who say, okay, you know what, there are some really interesting, you know, those questions about East pre-verb inflection are really interesting, and we can put students on them and really make interesting strides, where doing yet another study about related to English isn't going to push the envelope as much. If we can make that case, maybe we can make the case that these things deserve people working on them, and people will go into them. But, you know, so far that case isn't being made. So thank you for your time, and I wish you all safe returns to wherever you've come from. Bye-bye.